Ladies and gentlemen, Behind the Line proudly presents to you another exciting edition of the Woke Turning On the Woke. This episode is brought to you by the diversity deputies. There's an appalling crime. All the deputies cry for diversity. They hire White Steve and you're feeling aggrieved. Call social worker Shanice. Have you been recently fired by a network that proudly identified as the worldwide leader in woke? Have you noticed that POCs and LGBTs are no longer receiving paychecks for their lack of contribution? If you or someone you know is feeling aggrieved, Shanice and the diversity deputies are the lawyers you need. Shanice and the deputies are highly trained in the implementation of white guilt. We have a successful track record of extorting large corporations into giving you money you haven't earned. Sign up today for your free consultation at diversitydeputies.com. Back in February, Awful Announcing released a report detailing the insecurity at the worldwide leader in woke, ESPN. Over the last few years, there have been countless layoffs at the network. Not only were people behind the scenes affected, the layoffs also included some big names. Sam Ponder, Bob Griffin the Trace, Zach Lowe, which was incredibly confusing to me. For those that don't know, Zach Lowe was an NBA insider. He was one of the best they had covering the NBA, which isn't saying all that much because ESPN's coverage of the NBA is a steaming turd. I guess the problem was Zachary did not represent diversity, so ESPN fires his ass, but they call Monica McNutt an NBA analyst. Monica McDougal wasn't qualified to play in the WNBA, but somehow ESPN thinks she's qualified to analyze the NBA. Trey Wingo, Kenny Mayne, Steve Young, Jeff Van Gundy, Max Kellerman, which, by the way, if anyone has seen Max Kellerman lately, please contact the Missing Persons Unit in the WNBA dump. For the most part, the layoffs at ESPN, they included conservative or apolitical voices or white dudes, white women. One of the few woke stars that was impacted by the layoffs was Father Jalen Rose, former lead pastor at Woke United Methodist. But recently, I've noticed a little bit of a shift at ESPN, and maybe, just maybe, it's one of the reasons for the rampant insecurity at the network. Make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Link to the second channel is in the description below. Today on the second channel, going to be talking about the massive decline in NBA ratings for the Western Conference Finals. Up until this point, ratings for the NBA playoffs were the highest they've been in over 10 years. I think the playoffs have been phenomenal. That game last night between the Knicks and the Pacers, that was an instant classic. It was arguably the best game of the season. Now, some in the media, they're concerned about these massive declines in the Western Conference Finals. Some are worried that ratings for the NBA Finals could be dangerously low at the matchup as Pacers-Thunder. But I'll explain why this isn't necessarily a bad thing for the NBA and why there shouldn't be cause for concern, at least yet, about these ratings. So if you haven't already, click the link in the description below, subscribe to the second channel. Tomorrow is going to be a devastating day for proud deacons at Woke United Methodist who are currently collecting woke welfare at ESPN, because tomorrow is the final episode of Around the Horn. Over the past 10 or so years, Around the Horn has been the television version of Anscape. For those that don't know, Anscape is the ESPN website that's dedicated to mythical racism. It's basically where ESPN buries people like David Dennis Jr., who don't make any kind of real contribution, but they earn their paycheck by representing diversity. For the past 10 years, Around the Horn has been kind of the same thing. Instead of featuring stars and actual journalists, instead of featuring diversity of thought, Around the Horn started featuring diversity of color, gender, sexuality. Instead of featuring seasoned journalists, Around the Horn started featuring Mina Kimes, Sarah Spain, Kate Fagan, David the Junior Doofus. The vast majority of these panelists, they are more anonymous than the dump divers in the WNBA, and they've had the benefit of being on mainstream television for the last decade. Over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of speculation as to why Around the Horn was canceled. According to Tony Reali, the host of the show, according to Anthony, ratings were not the reason for the cancellation, even though Around the Horn's ratings were in the pooper. Over the last 2 months, Around the Horn was averaging 362,000 viewers. PTI, which airs directly after, they were averaging 575,000, a 59% increase. That is unheard of. It is extremely rare for a lead-in to average 60% less than the show that's coming on directly after them. Now, according to Woody Page, whose nickname became very fitting for the modern version of Around the Horn, ooh, Woody. According to Woodrow, the introduction of new voices prevented the show from reaching new heights. Translation? Featuring unknown woke wanker spankers who no one wanted to watch and who preferred their Woody grilled, it destroyed the show. This sentiment was also echoed by Sarah Spain, who is outraged over the cancellation. You guys remember Sarah Spain, right? She's the journalist who became famous by auctioning herself off as a date to the Super Bowl. I believe the bidding started at a dime and the denomination was eventually lowered to pesos to influence people to wager. Sarah Spain is outraged because ESPN is removing progressive voices and people of color from TV. She accused the network of being afraid to be called woke. I know that might sound strange since ESPN has spent the last few years proudly embracing the woke wiener, but for the first time, possibly ever, I happen to agree with Sarah Spain. Now, I don't think ESPN is afraid of being labeled woke, but I do think ESPN has finally realized being woke is bad for business. As a result, I think ESPN is slowly eradicating the woke fungus. Just look at some of their recent actions. They canceled Around the Horn. Not only did they cancel the show, they didn't even notify Tony Reali and the panelists that the show was being canceled. Earlier this week, Tony Reali was speaking with Dan Patrick, and he claimed that he found out about the cancellation of Around the Horn in the New York Post. Tony Reali's contract expires at the end of the summer, and it's entirely possible it's not going to be renewed. Now, keep in mind, Tony Reali is primarily responsible for the destruction of Around the Horn. He is the one who diversified the show. He defended this decision by claiming 10 to 15 woke segments should not define our show. It's not fair. Logically, I could see why that would make sense, but oftentimes, logic doesn't always apply to perception. It wasn't just Around the Horn that was perceived as woke. ESPN as a network was perceived as woke. Around the Horn just happened to be the beacon of their obsession with wiener. Yesterday, it was announced that ESPN was firing Stan Verrett. Hey, it's me, Stanley V! I would imagine most of you have no idea who in the hell Stanley is. Stanley has been at ESPN for the last 25 years. I believe one of the reasons that ESPN is letting him go is because he's an embarrassment to the network. Stanley is a lead combatant in the fight against mythical racism. He also supports men and women's sports. He also has this unhealthy obsession with Clay Travis and Outkick. According to Bobby Burek at Outkick, Executives and producers at ESPN have reached out and apologized to him several times over the embarrassment of Stanley Verrett. More than likely, Stanley will blame mythical racism for the expiration of his woke welfare, but no one will listen because no one knows who in the hell he is. ESPN seems to be slowly, very slowly, distancing themselves from the woke fungus. The two questions are, who's next and why? Could it be Mark Jones? Who? Mark Jones! Mark Jones! That would be one of my first choices. Like his good friend Stanley, Mark Jones is a constant embarrassment. Plus, he's arguably the worst broadcaster in the history of broadcasting. Go listen to Mark Jones call an NBA game. If it were me and I were making the decisions, I'd also start letting go of these fake analysts. I'm not saying they have to be fired, but Mina Kimes is not qualified to analyze the NFL. Monica McDougal is not qualified to analyze the NBA. Monica McDougal being an NBA analyst, that's like Gilbert Arenas analyzing Major League Baseball. He's probably never picked up a bat unless he's spanking his own ass with it. Now, the other question is why? Why would ESPN eradicate the woke fungus? For starters, it's no longer mainstream to be woke. I guarantee you, ESPN saw networks like CNN, MSNBC struggling and realized that America had rejected the woke fungus. I've heard some things recently about management at ESPN. I don't think they actually agreed with deacons at Woke United Methodist, but they were afraid to stop them because they were afraid of the backlash. They were afraid of being accused of mythical racism. ESPN has a long history of being allergic to controversy and backlash. They're also launching their new streaming service later this summer, which will supposedly be a better version of the ESPN that we see on cable. ESPN's charging $30 a month. They are reliant on people being willing to pay $30 a month for access to ESPN, which means ESPN cannot afford controversy. ESPN can't afford backlash from normal people. They can't give anyone a reason to not subscribe, especially when the price alone is reason enough for some people. Think about it. We are nearly halfway through the year. When is the last time you heard anything political from someone at ESPN? Trump is in office. There's plenty of opportunity for outrage from Elle Duncan or Malika Andrews, Mina Kimes. When is the last time SportsCenter was interrupted so Elle Duncan can complain about abortion? Maybe the insecurity at ESPN is caused by the shift at the network, the shift away from the woke fungus and the shift towards being a sports network. Maybe some of these woke stars are realizing they're no longer protected by claims of fake racism. If that is indeed the case, who's next? Who could be the next to go at ESPN? You tell me. Sound off in the comments below. I'll see you guys later.